So perhaps it's time for the world to turn the tables on the American people and the American government. Perhaps it is time for global sanctions and tariffs on Trump's America and its goods until the US demonstrate any tangible results in dismantling its own money laundering networks. So four people were executed in China because they were trying to smuggle 200 or more kilograms of illegal drugs. They were then tried in court of law, sentenced to death, and executed a few days ago. There were pleas from the Canadian government for an extradition, and there were promises of a fair trial in Canada, but China stood firm to enforce their own laws. So people were crying, oh, what about human rights? And I ask this question, what about the human rights of those who would die from the poison that these traffickers sought to import into the country? You may know that I am Colombian. I was born and raised in Cali, a city that is famous for its drug cartel. I grew at a time where there was a brutal control of the cartels by society. I lived through the societal rotten that these narcotics inflict. It's a cancer that metastasizes through every single layer of society, something that we see today in places like Mexico. It affected our businesses, our institutions, real estate, cars, entertainment, sports, politics, the judiciary, absolutely everything. I personally lost my first business because drug money from the Cali cartel ended up financing a presidential campaign for the president that actually won. This is the reality of this cancer of drug trade. However, today I want to confront this reality that is being highlighted by these executions in China. China's unwavering stance on drugs is based in history, is sealed by the Opium Wars and the century of humiliation. China will never, ever again allow their nation to be ravaged by foreign imposed addictions like they once did. Still, this reality exists. Drug use happens everywhere, even in China. I've known people here who have dealers on speed dial. I even know an American person that I train but I did not hire, who is actually sitting right now in a Dongguan prison because he was a dealer. He was not sentenced to death because he pled guilty, but he actually betrayed every single one of his clients when he was captured. And that included someone that I once worked with making videos here in the country. So I just want to make one thing clear. The moment that I detect any kind of connection to drugs within my circle of friends, I sever ties immediately and completely. I've done it even with family members who I found were using drugs in the country. This is the unvarnished truth behind my sudden closing of a podcast that I had on another channel. It's that simple. So let's talk about who uses drugs in China. Well, some privileged people, usually younger people, who are foolishly seduced by these Western ideas of what's cool, what's fun, what's hip, yeah. But we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking that drug use is rampant or very popular in the country. It's very marginal. It's a very stark contrast to the West, precisely because of these draconian penalties. And I think it's also important at this point to address a very known fact. You all know this widely circulated picture that is used by human rights NGOs to attack China, saying, oh, these are concentration camps in Xinjiang. Well, those pictures are actually drug rehabilitation centers. They actually are evidence that there are drug addicts in the country. There's actually one drug rehabilitation center not far from my home. So it's important to remember a very inconvenient truth. Yeah, for 2 decades, the Americans were in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has a border with China in Xinjiang. And for those 2 decades, the US oversaw a booming heroin production. Since they left and the Taliban took power, well, that production has plummeted. Causality, huh? So, the undeniable reality is this: China enforces and will continue to enforce its borders and its fight against drug trafficking with an iron fist. And they will continue to actively invest in rehabilitation of its addicts. The message is unequivocal. Simply do not do drugs in China. But it's the same one around Southeast Asia. Do not do drugs in Singapore. Do not do drugs in Malaysia. Do not do drugs in Indonesia. Basically, do not do drugs anywhere. But if you are doing drugs or selling drugs in a country that you know has a death penalty, then that level of stupidity is really on you. But anyway, the focus of today's video is more on the catastrophic failure of this so-called war on drugs that we've had for decades since I was a kid, and I'm over 50 right now. And also the urgent need to do a shift, a radical shift in the approach of drugs. Let's talk about China. China sells fentanyl precursors to Mexico. These are basically chemicals that are used to produce legitimate pharmaceuticals sold in hospitals and used in the healthcare industry. However, somehow these precursors end up in the hands of cartels in Mexico. Then they cross the border and they flood the US with this deadly drug. But in the process, they create billions and billions of dollars in profits for these cartels. Let us be clear here. Fentanyl has a legitimate medical use around the world. It is only the United States, the country that has a problem with this. It's worth asking ourselves why that is. I blame basically the permissive culture and the feckless legislation of the United States. It's important that we are not naive about this. If China were to all of a sudden stop selling precursor to Mexico, American addicts would simply create the demand for the next deadly substance. And don't be wrong about this, the cartels will be right there to exploit this new demand. Because this is not about any specific drug that Americans are using. It's about a profound societal decay, a moral rot in America that is intertwined with economic desperation that drives people to seek an escape from reality. And they found that in drugs and alcohol. Now, here's a concrete proposal for this issue. What if China were to sell finished pharmaceutical grade fentanyl directly to the United States instead of selling precursor to Mexico? That's an interesting proposal because this legal trade would create direct accountability for the US Health Administration if fentanyl ever ended up in the streets being used illegally, wouldn't it? Now there's a more fundamental issue that we need to confront and discuss, is that the US is constantly threatening countries around the world, in particular in Mexico, with tariffs, with sanctions, even with military intervention, as some have actually said that they should send special ops teams and fight the cartels in Mexico. And they are demanding Mexico to eradicate these narco-societies within their borders. Narco-societies exist in Mexico. Narco-societies exist in Colombia. But there's also something called sovereignty. They should be dealt with, but not at the hand of the United States. Because we need to be brutally honest here. The drug trade would collapse immediately if you remove two critical components. One, this insatiable demand of American addicts, and two, the sophisticated infrastructure of laundering this astronomical amount of dollars in profits in this trade. Because we're talking here about thousands and thousands, layers upon layers of financial people, lawyers, banks, institutions, and yes, of course, government officials who all facilitate the flow of drug money into the hands of these cartels. That is a truth. That cannot be argued against. So perhaps it's time for the world to turn the tables on the American people and the American government. Perhaps it is time for global sanctions and tariffs on Trump's America and its goods until the U.S. demonstrate any tangible results in dismantling its own money laundering networks. That would be something. Because remember, is these two failures, the utter defeat in the war on addiction, which I don't think has ever existed as an idea, and this complicit inaction in the war on money laundering. Don't be fooled. These are the twin engines that drive the overall failure of the war on drugs. You don't attack those, you'll never end this. The other uncomfortable truth is that America has a vested interest in perpetuating this crisis, the same as conflicts and selling weapons and starting wars around the world. Drugs are the same because it profits from this business. So despite any moral posturing that you hear from the government or from politicians, this entire drug enterprise is devoid of any ethical compass. This fight against drugs, it's all talk, 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 but they will never do anything to stop it. Consider how useful this posturing is. The U.S., well, conveniently not recognizing the International Criminal Court, and this is speculation on my part, but I'm very sure that the U.S. actually pressured the Philippines and its president, President Marcos, to hand over former President Duterte, the one who was actually fighting these drug traffickers and drug addicts. And in handed over former President Duterte, they also handed over a great deal of national sovereignty. And now, Marcos has paved the way for unchecked military expansion in the country. Do remember that he is the one who is pushing for Vice President Duterte to be impeached. This will potentially remove her as a political opponent come election time. We are going to see a rapid expansion of U.S. military presence, more missiles, more troops through the 9 EDCA bases in the Philippines. These are military bases that even the Philippine president cannot enter without American authorization. This is literally American territory that has been given by Marcos to the United States. The truth is, the war on drugs will never end unless the United States decides to confront and dismantle the financial behemoths that actually sustain drug trade. But again, just like the suppressed Epstein files and the DD client list and the culprits of the CIA involved in JFK's assassination, or the impunity of USAID's color revolutions around the world, none of this is going to actually be of any consequence until there is a fundamental reckoning within the United States by the American people, until there is a revolution of the people that empowers the good people of America and, by extent, the world with a clean slate. This bloody futile war on drugs will continue to rage on. Please, do let me know what your thoughts are. Let's have an honest discussion in the comments below. Don't forget, please like, comment, subscribe, and share this video if you think that this message needs to be heard by someone. We really need to demand accountability from the United States. We need to demand change in the United States. Thank you for watching.